Welcome to a study of the Gospel of Matthew, Part 1, Lesson 11, in which Matthew describes how the Messianic King reveals himself. This is Matthew 11, 1 through 12, 37. Matthew intended chapters 11 and 12 to show how Jesus revealed himself as the Messianic King. In chapter 11, he reveals himself as the promised King. In chapter 12, he reveals that his kingship would entail suffering on his part and on the part of those who followed him. Another way of saying this is that he showed that he was the suffering servant of Isaiah 52, 13 through 53. Thus, these two chapters are a continuation of the ones we have studied previously. Due to the number of pericopes in these lessons, I've divided this unit into two lessons. Number 1, Jesus and John the Baptist, Matthew 11, 1 through 19. The imprisonment of John by Herod Antipas marked the end of the work of the one who prepared the way for the coming of the Messianic King. John evidently believed, as did the Jews of the Qumran community, that there would be two Messiahs. Now, that's a deduction. We can't absolutely prove it, but from the language that John uses, from the deductions we can make based on that, his views seem to have paralleled those of the Qumran community. One whose suffering and death would bring salvation and healing to the Jews, and a second Messiah who would destroy the Roman Empire by force of arms, place himself on the throne of his ancestor David, and rule the earth in this age and the age to come. His question implied no doubt that Jesus was the one sent by God and was one or the other of the expected Messiahs. He just couldn't seem to decide which Messiah Jesus was. He might have even had difficulty deciding which Messiah he wanted him to be. I know that from a study of the other religious teachers around the Second Temple Judaism, that they couldn't decide which one they thought would be most desirable. Usually they came down on the one where the Jews chased the Romans out of the empire and established a kingdom in this age and the age to come. Jesus did not give John's messengers any theological arguments as to his identity. This is it's almost a pattern that the kingdom is seen in the Gospel of Matthew and in the other Gospels by who Jesus is and what he does. He doesn't argue. That's what the religious political leaders of the Jews wanted. They wanted some hard and fast evidence. They wanted a sign, in their words, from heaven. When they got that sign, they did. Jesus addressed the Father, "Glorify my name." And the voice from heaven said, "I have glorified it, and I will glorify it." And the bystander said, "It thundered." That might be a salutary idea to meditate on sometime. I have serious doubts that what these messengers carried back to Jesus cleared up John's confusion. Then he proceeded to eulogize John by saying his ministry of preparation had ended. It had been replaced by the age of the kingdom, the rule of heaven. As part of this discourse, he explicitly rejected the use of force by the Messianic king to usher in the kingdom, the rule of heaven. His parabolic description of children playing in the marketplace who couldn't decide whether to play sad music or whether to play dance tunes rebukes the Jewish religious leaders who wouldn't or couldn't decide which of the messiahs they believed in. He then takes up the mantle of John and chides the proud inhabitants of the cities and towns of the Palestine for not being any better than the Gentiles. This would be completely insulting to the Jewish religious leaders. This is Matthew 11:20 through 24. In this context, severe punishment, he promises rest to those who are faithful Jews. Matthew 11:25 through 20. To them would be revealed the hitherto hidden things concerning the nature of the kingdom, the rule of heaven. They would receive the rest and comfort promised by a gentle Messiah who brought them from his Father in heaven. And this, by natural progression, proceeds to Jesus claiming to be Lord of the Sabbath. The subject of rest prompts Matthew to tell the story of Jesus' conflict with the Jewish religious leaders concerning the proper observance of the Sabbath, which of course is just the Hebrew word for rest. He pointedly demonstrates the hypocrisy of the Jewish religious leaders in their teaching about what is lawful to do on the Sabbath. Then he rebukes them for placing a higher value on their domestic animals than they did on a human being. I'm afraid that far too many religious leaders today still follow their example. His rejection of their teaching caused the Pharisees to begin plotting how they might put him to death. Next pericope, God's chosen servant. With this text, Matthew began to demonstrate that Jesus is the suffering servant of Isaiah 52:13 through 53. And this is Matthew 12, 13 through 21. Lest his readers fail to discern that Jesus is the suffering servant of Isaiah, Matthew inserts a quotation from Isaiah 42, verses 1 through 4. This identification of Jesus as the suffering servant continued to confuse the Jews even after the resurrection and ascension of Jesus. See Luke's record of the trial before the Sanhedrin of some of the apostles in Acts 8, 26 through 34. Note also that the text quoted says that the Gentiles would be included among the covenant people during this Messianic age. And then in closing, Jesus and Beelzebub. Matthew 12, 27 through 37. Beelzebub, there's a textual difference here, is a transliteration of the Hebrew word that's a name of the devil. The length of this pericope is a measure of the importance of the subject, both to Jesus and his listeners. This is a subject that is confusing to many believers today because it was important to Jesus, to his followers, and potentially to his followers at the present time. One of the major themes of Jewish speculation and teaching about the Messianic age was that the Messiah would have the power to cast out demons. In this text, the common people, seeing Jesus casting out demons, respected him and responded by asking the rhetorical question, "This is the Son of David, isn't it?" They saw the power of the Messiah at work in the life of Jesus. If he can cast out demons, he is the Messiah, isn't he? The question indicates that they believed that indeed he was the promised king of the lineage of David, who was to establish the throne of David for the duration of the present age and into the age to come. He uses this opportunity to teach his followers that his authority to cast out demons means that the kingdom of heaven was already present in his person. Then we come to the so-called unpardonable sin. I guess there's been more ink spilled and more confusion spread over this subject than nearly any other single subject in the New Testament. The common people recognized that Jesus was the promised Messianic king of David's lineage. However, the Jewish leaders perversely attributed his power over demons to the fact that he was really the devil incarnate. In doing so, they were committing a sin that could not be forgiven in this age or in the age to come. Now, this does not mean that it's impossible in the absolute rational sense, but that it would not be because they rejected the witness of the Holy Spirit. The only power to convict us of sin and open the door of forgiveness is the power of the Spirit. If I reject the testimony of the Spirit, there is nothing left. It is not that God is impotent. It is that I have rejected the way God has chosen to offer me salvation. Now that's an important point, because we don't have to worry about unpardonable sins and definitions or anything. It is simply this: either I listen to the teaching that the Holy Spirit brings to me and receive all the blessings of forgiveness that God has in store for me, or I reject it, and that's the end of the story. The sin is not unpardonable. It remains unpardoned because I have rejected the only means by which pardon could come to me. I will bring this lesson to a close at this point and continue it in the next lesson. I will also propose a discussion of how you may make the teachings of these two chapters yours in that lesson. Thank you, and have a good day.